Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar where we will be providing an overview of the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act. That's a mouthful, but before we get started, I do want to say thank you on behalf of Revell. We know your practice has been affected dramatically by COVID-19 and that you continue to face new challenges. So we want to extend our sincerest thanks for all that you've done and continue to do to be there for your patients. Know that we are committed to doing everything that we can to make that easier for you. So if at any time you need us as a resource, know that we're here to help. And one way that we decided we could do that today is obviously to present on a lot of the information that's out there regarding the Paycheck Protection Program. So if you've joined one of our webinars in the past, you probably already know who I am. I am Caitlin Hausman, Marketing and Communications Manager here at Revell. And then joining me today to present is our Chief Financial Officer, Madan Murali. So Madan's going to be presenting today, and then at the end, we will leave time for questions for Madan. But before we get into it, just a few housekeeping items. One, know that you have a Q&A box on your screen for a reason, so you can ask questions throughout the webinar, and like I said, we'll get to those at the end. We're also recording the presentation, so we will send out the full slide deck and the recording once the webinar concludes. And then last, Revell does not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. So we put this material together solely for informational purposes. We do recommend that you consult your tax, legal, and accounting advisors before engaging in any transaction. So with that being said, Madan, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Caitlin. Thanks everyone for joining today. Hope everyone is safe and well. Obviously during the unprecedented time. I think we've heard that a bunch of times, but definitely is unprecedented. So just like what Caitlin was saying, we wanted to kind of cover this kind of outside of what your typical webinar would be with Revell, but we wanted to kind of cover some of the stimulus items that are out there, just to bring to your attention. I probably would imagine most of you guys are already aware of most of these, but really wanted to kind of cover some of these in detail, and then with it still being available and just making sure that everyone's kind of aware of some of the options out there. So we're going to focus really on the Paycheck Protection Program. It's often referred to, you may commonly hear it being called the PPP. So I'll just continue to refer to it then, because it's kind of a mouthful to continue to say Paycheck Protection Program. So under the CARES Act, which is if you look back at April, beginning of April, the CARES Act came out and it provided for this Paycheck Protection Program and initially funded $349 billion worth under this particular program. And the real purpose of it was to avoid people having to lay off their employees due to the volume change or due to the business impact that the coronavirus had. It was such a popular thing that it exhausted in less than 2 weeks. And people were immediately funded. You work through your bank and that sort of thing. That in the end of April, I believe it was April 21st, they funded an additional $310 billion to be eligible under the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP. Again, intended to provide loans to businesses to guarantee 8 weeks of payroll and other costs so that the business could remain viable. One of the reasons we really want to kind of highlight this now is there's still, as of June 15th, there was 130 billion still available in the second go around out of that 310. A lot of the volume dropped off mainly because of the lack of clarity on the forgiveness portion of the loan, which I'll get into a little bit more with the new Flexibility Act that came out, and how the forgiveness part was impacted or even made more clear as to what you needed to do to qualify. Part of also the stimulus part was the comparison, there was another option, which is the economic injury disaster loan. And so we thought we'd highlight kind of the difference between the two. Interestingly enough, I believe on the 15th of June, this was opened back up. The EIDL was opened back up to non-agricultural companies. So they did have an initial round, actually prior to the PPP coming out, that allowed you to get up to 2 million, and you can kind of see the comparison between the two on this slide. Up to 2 million, but it did come with different terms. I mean, the PPP loan was 2 years, now it's 5 years. The EIDL loan was basically a loan, small business loan, for 30 years. And you can see the interest rate difference, 3 3/4% payable over 30 years. So it becomes an option that was out there. The unfortunate thing, I think, from my experience, is that they weren't prepared for the volume. And I think the application within the SBA website changed 3 or 4 times on how they were going to process it, and they were just not ready. And so the first go around, there might even still be people out there that haven't heard back. But part of the advantage is I think they've cleaned up a lot of that stuff and figured out how to streamline that a little bit more. But just in comparison, it had a $10,000 advance, so you could sign up for. You didn't have the ability to dictate what you would get, but you filled out the application, and if you applied for the $10,000 advance, in most situations, I believe the people received it. Then they did end up limiting that to $1,000 per full-time employee, capped at $10,000. But that's also available for independent contractors and small self-employed businesses as well. So some of the other things, you can't use the money for both. So if you get the PPP, you need to dedicate that to the payroll, and then you could use your EIDL for other items. Obviously, if you utilize all of the PPP funds, then you can. It's all guidance shows that you can use the EIDL for that as well. No forgiveness on that one. That's again a 30-year loan, depending on the amount. I think that the default now that I've seen is 150K is what everybody, because of the volume, was getting. And that required no guarantees, but you did have to collateralize with maybe some equipment or things like that in your offices or anything like that. So really, over 30 years at that percentage, it's not too bad of an option for you. So I just wanted to bring that up again, June 15th. So they did come out at the end of April for another additional 60 billion in this EIDL, but they limited it to the agricultural side. And then as of June 15th, they came back out and said this is open back up to any business at this point. So we wanted to make sure that also is out there as an option and something that we can look into. The process is a little bit longer than the PPP, and I'll kind of dive into the sort of the big takeaways from the PPP, and then also get into the eligibility side too, and hopefully some of these things may be stuff that you already know, and we can clarify some things too on that. So as far as the takeaways go, 100% of the loan is out there to potentially be forgiven. So if you use it all for payroll, and if you use it all for payroll, rent, mortgage, and utilities, you can then apply. When you do apply, it should in most cases be 100% forgiven. Now there is a limitation that we'll kind of dive into the changes here, but you had to use at least 75%. So if you looked at 100% forgiveness, 75% of that had to have been used for payroll, and the additional 25% could be used for the utilities, the rent or mortgage, or if you use 100% for payroll, then obviously there's no issue there. Calculation and kind of how they came up with the amount was the lesser of 10 million or 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. The range, and there was a lot of back and forth, was the calendar year 2019 average monthly payroll. So you would just take your entire year and then calculate the average monthly payroll, or you could do a rolling 12 months, depending on when you were going to apply. That's still the case now. Again, you can also have both the PPP and economic injury disaster loan or the EIDL, like we talked about on the previous slide. You just have to make sure it's not being used for the same thing. Eligibility, we'll go into that here in the next slide, but you can kind of the detail there, but it's really kind of any business under 500 employees. And then you would go through an actual bank, so an SBA approved lender, which a lot of the larger banks are already approved, and I know that some that weren't were going through the process of getting approved so that they could provide the PPP loans. The deadline is June 30th deadline. So, unfortunately, if you haven't done it now, there's limited time, but there's still the opportunity out there to do it. Again, so the base is kind of the 2.5 times. If you go back to the original cover period, which I'll get into a little bit more on how that changes, but it was 8 weeks. So this would allow you to have 2 months worth of payroll, and then the additional 0.5 would allow you to cover some utilities, rent, and rent or mortgage. So that was the basis for their 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. As far as eligibility goes, like I said, 500 or fewer employees, full and part-time. There is some exceptions to if you're over 500, but there's a lot of more qualifications that need to be met. And typically, you may have seen even in the news that some of these larger companies that did get PPP loans did end up paying it back. So instead of using it. Businesses have been negatively impacted by the coronavirus. Obviously, the healthcare industry has been impacted. So everyone here should qualify. Really, I think across the board, there's really no industry that was not impacted in any way. So I interpret this to say really any business. And then you can obviously see some of the specifics. They did have a phased approach where the small businesses were able to apply through banks first, and then they opened it up by the 10th. I think it was 1 week difference. Self-employed workers, independent contracts, gig workers could apply for the PPP loan application. So that was some of your eligibility requirements. Pretty straightforward. If you're a small business, you're really eligible to go for the PPP program, or the PPP, I should say. So that leads us to how do you apply. So lenders begin accepting applications on the 27th. This is for the second round. So the first round, I think, opened up first week, April 10th, maybe April 15th, for the first round. And then now, since they opened it back up, April 27th was that when they started taking applications for the second round, with the deadline being June 30th. Again, this is where the 130 million as of, I think, last Friday was still available. You can go and apply before June 30th, and this has a link to the application. My recommendation is to go to your bank directly. If you have a banking relationship, go to them directly, and they'll provide you with an application. They may even have a portal for you to do the application. But if you want to refer to what's required on that application, I would definitely go to this website and check out what is required and go there. But again, work directly with your lender. We had a pretty fluid experience with it and the portal, and we worked directly with our relationship manager, and it kind of worked very seamlessly. So I would definitely recommend doing that if you haven't done so already. And as far as what you need to have, prove that you were operational as of February 15, 2020, that you had employees, and then the amount of your average monthly payroll cost. If you use a payroll company or an application, I would almost guarantee that these reports are now created there for you to pull down pretty quickly. Or if not, give them a call and they should be able to provide you with that. If you're doing it yourself, the accounting application, really, I would just pull your payroll reports for the time period that you want to use. So if it's fiscal year, or if it's calendar year 2019, just pull that, and then you could calculate the average that way. What I've also seen is that most banks will work with you on this. So if you provide them with the reports, they'll confirm with whatever you include as your amount of average monthly payroll costs. So that's kind of an overview of, it does include some of the new information, but really the next few slides are kind of going to dive into what came out with the PPPFA. Sorry, there's so many acronyms, but and what kind of new things will add clarity. It really focuses around the forgiveness side. I think, again, like I was mentioning, the 130 billion is still there because they believe volume fell off because people just weren't clear on what it took to have everything forgiven. So we'll kind of go into some of the points here. So the minimum maturity for the new loans, in the CARES Act that came out in April, as I mentioned on the comparison slide, was initially just for 2 years. So you had the 8-week period, and then as soon as the 8-week period was and forgiveness happened, you would have 2 years to pay that off. Now that with the new Flexibility Act has now increased to 5 years. If you applied for the second go around, or you apply after June 5th, which is when the PPFA came out, it automatically goes to the minimum maturity of 5 years. If you were on the first round, and you were under the 2-year maturity, you just need to speak with your lender and discuss the extension from 2 to 5. My experience and what I have also seen out there is the banks have been pretty accommodating to the 5-year extension if that's something that's of interest and you haven't had any past issues, obviously. So again, that would be dependent on your specific banking relationship. So if that's something that you're interested in doing, if you have already gotten the PPP, then I would suggest having that conversation with them. So that, and then the other additional thing would be the payroll cost requirement. So if you if in the original CARES Act, it was 75% payroll cost, so you had to use out of the money that you got at least 75% on payroll. This is to say if you want 100% forgiveness. So if you don't use up to the 75%, then it limits the amount. So you could have a partial loan forgiveness if it's less than the 75%. So in the PPPFA, they reduced that amount to 60%. There was some confusion in the initial release of that information on whether that 60% was a cliff, meaning you had to use 60%, or if you didn't get any forgiveness. But they've come back out with some new guidance and new language to say, no, it's to say the same thing as the 75%. So if you don't use 60%, you still qualify for partial loan. And then the 40% can be used for mortgage, rent, utilities, and that sort of thing outside of the payroll component. So that did reduce. There's a lot of concern that people needed more than the 25% to be able to pay that. Again, the ultimate goal being the 100% forgiveness of the loan. So along with these two limitations, there's the rehire and salary restoration safe harbor addition. So in the original CARES Act, the amount of your forgiveness could be impacted by whether you had a reduction in workforce or you had a reduction in salary. And the reduction in workforce was just the number of people you went down could impact your forgiveness. If you, on a salary wise, if you reduced anybody making less than $100,000 by more than 25%, then that could impact your forgiveness. The other side of it too is you had up until June 30th, which I'll kind of dive in the next slide too, but you had up until July 30th to restore either that salary amount or the headcount amount. Again, the big thing here is there are some qualifications for if you do try to go out and hire people or bring people, even the same people back, and they choose not to, that will give you a little bit of exceptions on the amount of forgiveness. So they won't, if you go out and you rehire or attempt to rehire an individual that you did have to let go during that period, and they decide that no, they just don't want to do that, then that's an acceptable thing. Just document it. Again, the big thing here is there's no official documentation to have. I would just record that the best way possible. And then also if you just don't business-wise return to the same level that you were pre-COVID, that is also something that just needs to be documented and explained, as we just are not at the volume or the revenue standpoint that we were pre-COVID, and so we cannot go bring these people back, and that would also be factored into the forgiveness calculation. Again, the big thing here is if you are doing those things, to make sure that you're documenting it, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. Just make sure it's documented, and then if for some reason more explanation is needed, you can obviously do that. So going kind of to the covered period side, is initially it was the June 30th. So you basically had between, if you received a loan in April, you had the requirement to rehire or increase wages back to the normal level by June 30th. Now with the new PFA, the Flexibility Act extends that cover period to December 31st, 2020. So you have the entire year, the next 6 months, to bring people back in or attempt to rehire. They may not decide to join back, or you can also document the impact that it has to your business to decide whether or not you can rehire those folks. The other side of it is the 8 weeks. So the initial CARES Act had the 8-week period. Again, that's the June 30th. So it was from the time you got the loan, you had 8 weeks to utilize the funds for those particular payroll, rent, mortgage, and utilities reasons. And if you didn't by the end of those 8 weeks, then your forgiveness for that amount was reduced. Now that has now been extended to 24 weeks. So if you do if you can choose to continue to keep the 8 weeks if that worked for you and you spent the money and it's all documented properly, then you can move forward. If you think that you still can utilize that money, which I think is a very common thing now, is most people weren't able to use all those funds before the end of the year because of the 75 and 25% limitation, that you can extend it up to 24 weeks. Again, it's really however long you need it, but it can be longer than the 8 weeks, which has been a positive adjustment here for a lot of people. And so again, the extension of the loans are still cut off at June 30th. From everything that I could see, there is some confusion, I think, in ways you can read the act to say that, I still have until December 31st, 2020 to apply, but it still continues to be the June 30th, 2020 deadline to apply for the loan, but you can use it for the next 6 months, which would take you, so if you got it on June 30th, it would take to the end of the year to be able to use those funds. And then the extension of cover period for forgiveness, that's the 8 week and 24 week period increase that I was discussing just on the previous slide. Again, that you can continue to keep it at the 8 weeks if that works, but if you needed it more than that period, then it's 24 weeks. If you're just going for the application now, it's likely going to be the 24 weeks, which is really kind of beneficial, but you can still spend it in the time frame that you need to. So that kind of talks about the forgiveness side. The one other side that it clarified was the extension of the deferral period. So, you can defer it up to 10 months, and then you have, sorry, let me start back over. So the 10 months that's included here is you have within the end of the time that you use all those funds, you have 10 months to fill out the application for forgiveness. So if June 30th is, or that 8 week period is what you stick with, and once that 8 weeks is over, you've got 10 months until within that time frame that you need to submit your application for forgiveness. And then once your forgiveness is granted by the lender, that's when your interest and your payments start to take place, and you need to pay it off, assuming that you don't have any, or it's not all forgiven. And then the kind of the last thing is the deferral of employer payroll taxes. So this has been an interesting one because I think it's something that wasn't very clear in the beginning. And basically the idea here is, and under the initial CARES Act, it wasn't clear whether you could, let me restate it. If you got a PPP, the understanding was that you couldn't defer the employer taxes. And the employer taxes I'm referring to are specifically the 6.2% Social Security portion, the employer portion of the Social Security payroll tax. There was confusion on whether you could do it if you had the PPP. It then further came out to say you could do it up until the time that you got forgiveness. So within that 8 week, basically the way it was stated before is you could defer it for those 8 weeks. Now they've come out to say you can defer it whether you have the PPP loan whether you're forgiven on the PPP loan, you can defer it until the end of the year. And then you don't have to, you pay 50% in 2021, and then you pay the other 50% of that deferral in 2022. So it gives you, from a cash flow perspective, some savings there. You still accrue the tax if if I speak accounting terms, you accrue it still. So it's still an expense. You just don't have to pay it. So from a cash flow purposes, that was their point, or their object of the of giving that sort of deferral. So I think that's a beneficial thing. I think that's something that a lot of people could take advantage of. And I'm glad they cleared that up, because it was, if you read it one way or read it the other way, you may have missed out. And then the change is retroactive, so you can make up for that too. So that part is also a good adjustment on their side. So that's kind of a high level overview of the PPP, even the EIDL to some extent, and the new Flexibility Act and some of the changes that are provided there. I added some frequently asked questions. These are some of the things that even as we kind of went through the process, I experienced, and then some additional questions even from some of our clients too. So the first one, like, is there any reason not to apply? I mean, for me, my opinion is no, there's no reason not to apply. I think, again, going back, now that they've clarified a lot of the confusion around the forgiveness part, there's really no reason not to apply. It's impacted anybody here that's probably on this call. So as far as eligibility and qualifications, there's probably no question here. So I would say no, I don't see any downside to it. One of the, and maybe not the, I still think it's an okay the way to look at it is, if you don't achieve forgiveness, it's still a loan that's 5 years out that's at 1%, which is actually a pretty good loan. So I don't see any downside to not applying. And then obviously, if you get the funds, it'll help the cash flow side, and you can use the cash flow you may earn on the others on other items to pay off other things and take care of other expenses. So yeah, so to me, the answer would be no, there's no reason not to apply. Can I apply at any bank? This may be changing, but the initial feedback from a lot of bankers was they would only accept applications from folks that they had relationships with. So that's why the recommendation is to go to your direct banker and say, you're ready to do this. I did see that there are some banks that did cut it off as of June 15th. However, I feel like if there was a strong enough push for additional requests, that most of these banks would be okay doing it. I don't know anything that would say that, but that's just a feeling I have. Can my PPP loan be forgiven if I laid off employees that I then offer to rehire? It would, yes, it would be an exception if you did make the offer to rehire and they chose not to, or maybe they did choose. Either way, it should be good. What time period do I use to calculate the average monthly payroll? This is kind of dependent on, I would say, really what your bank says, but everything that's out there says calendar year 2019 or a rolling 12 months to the time that you want to do it. So if you did it today, rolling 12 months, from last June to this June. And then the earliest date that we could file an application for forgiveness is right directly after the covered period. So if you do the 8 weeks, I would do it right after the 8 weeks. You want to do it after you've spent the money, so that you can provide the proof that you did use the funds for the intention of the PPP. Again, 8 weeks or 24 weeks, and then you have that 10-month window to be able to do it. And then your loan kicks in, if some of it is not forgiven, at the time that the lender lets you know that what amount was forgiven. And then, is hazard pay or bonus covered under the PPP? This question did come in, I believe, from one of our either attendees or clients. It is, it just depends. I would say yes. From what I've read, hazard pay or bonus covered under PPP, meaning you could use the funds to pay hazard pay or to pay bonuses. And it should qualify for forgiveness. So I hope that, but I would double check. It might depend on what the hazard pay is for, but everything that I've read and seen out there says that it is eligible. You can use the PPP funds for that purpose. And then there was a question that came in regarding maternity leave, and if that was during the period of the covered period, and the answer is yes. I mean, if that's something that you cover from a benefit standpoint, or if they're unpaid, they're still not terminated, so they would be technically still on the payroll numbers or the headcount numbers. So they would be covered and included in there, and not somebody that you need to rehire. Now, if that person's not coming back, that may be when after maternity leave, which does happen on occasion, then maybe then you would need to look at rehiring in that position, or attempting to rehire in that position. So those are a lot of the questions that we've gotten. Hopefully the information was helpful, but yeah, that's the information I got. I would suggest if you guys have any questions specific to that, or as Caitlin mentioned in the beginning, definitely consult with your CPA or attorney to figure out if there's some specific stuff that you do. But we're obviously more than happy to help as much as we can, give you some more information on what our experience has been and what we've been hearing. We've been definitely keeping up on the situation. It's a very fluid situation, even with the forgiveness side on what keeps coming out and clarity that's needed. So, we're obviously keeping up on it, and we'll provide as much information similar to this or through a blog post or something like that with updates as we come across it.
Great, thanks, Madan. Yes, if you have a question, please type it into the chat panel and we'll keep it open here for a little while. Right now, I don't see any coming in. And as Madan said, you'll get a follow-up email with some resources that we've published on our blog, along with a recording of today's webinar if you want to share that with anyone else. And then, of course, the slide deck. I do not see any questions coming in, and I know we are right past the 30 minutes that we had kind of set here. So I think we might just go ahead and close out. If you have a question, there's a ton of ways you can get in touch with us, whether it be through your client performance manager, anyone really on your client success team, or you can just reply to the email that I'll send out to you later today with all of those resources. So big thanks again for taking time to join us. We really hope that this was helpful. Thank you, Madan, for presenting, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Take care.